Glad to see you back, and good job on the first quiz. Now let's get right into it. Did you know that the average salesperson in North America earns $42,844 a year? That's according to payscale.com at the time of this recording. So did you get into sales so that you could only average $42,000 a year? Of course you didn't. So as you go through these next training modules, I want you to pay close attention, because by learning the new model of selling, you'll be able to exponentially boost your commissions. Now remember, according to behavioral science, there are 3 forms of communication. And in sales, they translate to traditional selling techniques, consultative selling, which is logical-based questions, and then of course dialogue. Now remember, behavioral science have proven that we are the most persuasive when we allow others to persuade themselves. So it's a third form of communication I just mentioned, dialogue, that I built the new model of selling around. Traditional selling, telling your story, posturing, acting tough, trying to persuade through your presentations and telling your prospective clients that they should do business with you because you're the best at this or best at that, is the least persuasive way to sell. 99% of salespeople out there are still being taught the least effective way to sell, by presenting, by telling, by teaching. So the sales training that you keep learning has been proven to be the least persuasive. It actually works against human psychology. This never made any sense to me. So many salespeople use these worn out techniques that just don't work anymore in our time, in our age. But I'm going to give you another way, a way that will change your life and your family's lives financially forever. Now, if you're like the salespeople I train every day, you're probably going to tell me that a lot of the techniques you've been taught, that salespeople have been learning the last 30, 50 years, trigger sales pressure. You get a lot of objections from them. You get rejected. You get objections at every turn of the corner. And a lot of times that leaves you feeling burned out, a lowered self-esteem, and I would say an empty bank account. Old techniques like the assumptive close, we've all been taught that one, or the ABCs of closing, you got to always be closing, or fill, felt, found, or the trial close, or the demonstration close, or hey, you got to be relentless and just follow up all the time, or chase the sale. Here's one of my favorites. You got to be enthusiastic about your product or your service. You got to show them how excited you are, or accept rejection as a normal part of selling. My favorite one is, it's a numbers game to get as many no's as you can to get a yes. It doesn't make any sense. If any of these sales techniques and mantras sound familiar to you, then you know what I'm talking about. The question is, do these techniques you've learned from the gurus actually work very well in our economy today? Well, they simply just don't. Why? Because they go against everything we now know about building relationships. They work against human psychology. Most of what we think we understand about selling is constructed on a foundation of assumptions that have completely crumbled in the last few years. So why do today's salespeople sell the same way that salespeople did 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago? It's actually pretty easy to understand why. What's the average age of all the sales training gurus you buy your books and audio CDs from? You see, here's a list of the most popular books on sales that are being bought today. Did you notice something when you look at the authors? Most of these people are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Some of them have already passed away decades ago. So which generation did these men learn how to sell? Well, they learned how to sell back in the 1960s and 1970s and the 1980s, but the consumer was completely different then. Yet they're still teaching you how to sell like they did decades ago. Now, later on this course, we're going to explore how today's consumer is much, much different from yesterday's. But for now, let's talk about the primary differences between the old model of selling and the new model, or NEPQ. To demonstrate, let's look at an example. Now, I want to make note of this. I have nothing against this person. I'm sure he was a great human being when he was alive. I'm just showing you the difference between traditional selling techniques and the new model of selling today. Let's take a look at the author, Joe Girard. He's a best-selling author and Guinness World holder for the most cars sold in 1 year, all the way back in 1963. He says in his book, How to Sell Anything to Anybody, quote, that if prospects mention they've recently been on vacation somewhere, I'm going to tell them I've been there too, Because wherever that guy said he's been, I'm going to tell him I've been there too, even if I've never even heard of that place. He says a lot of people out there, maybe millions, have heard of me and thousands have bought from me, and they think they know a lot about me because I know a lot about them. If they said they've been to Yellowstone National Park, I'm going to tell them I've been there. If they say they fished for salmon near Traverse City, Michigan, I'm going to tell them I fished there. If they say I've got an aunt who lives near the local Air Force Base, I'm going to tell them I have an aunt who lives by that Air Force Base. So he's basically lying to his prospects to try and make a sale. Interesting. Gerard also describes in great length his favorite cold calling technique from the same book. It begins by choosing a random name in the phone book. In this example, a woman answers the phone. Let me role play with you. So Gerard says, "Hello, Mrs. Kalowski. This is Joe Gerard at Marolis Chevrolet. I just wanted to let you know that your car you ordered is ready." Miss Kalowski says, "I'm afraid you have the wrong number. We haven't ordered a new car." Gerard says, "Well, are you sure?" Miss Kalowski says, "Well, I'm pretty sure. My husband would have told me." Gerard then says, "Well, just a minute. Is this the home of Clarence J. Kalowski?" Miss Kalowski says, "No, my husband's name is Stephen." Gerard says, "Gee, Miss Kalowski, I'm very sorry to disturb you at this hour of the day. I'm sure you're very busy." Gerard doesn't just hang up the phone at this point. He keeps talking to her so he can bait the hook. Gerard then says, "Miss Kalowski, you don't happen to be in the market for a new car, are you?" Now, if she knows they are, she'll probably say yes, but the typical answer will be, "I don't think so, but you'll have to ask my husband." Gerard then says, "Oh, well, when can I reach him?" Miss Kalowski says, "Well, he's usually home by 6. Gerard then says, "Well, fine, Miss Kalowski, I'll call back then if you're sure I won't be interrupting supper." When 6 p.m. rolls around, you know what Joe Gerard is doing. Gerard then says, "Hello, Miss Kalowski. This is Joe Gerard at Marolis Chevrolet. I spoke to Miss Kalowski this morning, and she suggested I call you back at this time. I was wondering if you were in the market for a new Chevrolet." Mr. Kalowski says, "No, not just yet." Gerard then says, "Well, when do you think you might start looking at a new car?" Mr. Kalowski says, "Well, I guess I'll be needing one in maybe 6 to 12 months. Gerard then says, "Well, fine, Mr. Kalowski. I'll be getting in touch with you then. Oh, by the way, what are you driving now?" Gerard then files his name along with the reminder in his calendar to call him back in 6 to 12 months, and then moves on to the next name on the list. Now, I have to ask you this. Do you think, and really think about this, do you think using these type of manipulative sales techniques have caused consumers to not trust salespeople and to look at you in a negative way? You can just nod. Yeah, that's right. And people are still teaching this method today like it's the gospel. The fact that these techniques are still being taught today might seem to validate that this type of selling actually still works. But there's one thing you should know about Joe Gerard, aka the world's greatest salesman. He hasn't actually sold a car since 1977. He quit the business almost 4 decades ago to teach others how to sell. You see, Gerard's selling techniques might have worked in the mid-1970s, but today they have the whiff of old boxes forgotten in the attic. Think about it. In our day and time, Miss Kalowski's at work. She's not at home. Her household has caller ID to prevent salespeople from intruding on her family, and that's even if she has a home phone. And if a salesperson did get through the family's defenses, she would get rid of him quickly, maybe Google his name afterward and post to her Facebook friends and Twitter followers about the creepy call from the salesperson she got that night. But more broadly, Gerard's worldview and selling techniques resemble one of those old movies in which a soldier stuck on a remote island continues fighting because he hasn't gotten word the war has ended. This stuff should only exist in a time capsule. It's outdated and no longer congruent with how today's consumer actually buys. With AIDA model techniques like the ones used by Gerard and so many sales trainers, the salesperson would come into the office or home with a potential customer and try to find something they have in common. It's often mind-numbing, time-wasting chit-chat that feels fake. You know what I mean? Talking about the weather, or who won the game this week, or maybe they see a picture of the client fishing, so they talk about how they like to fish as well. It's basically a bunch of BS that really has nothing to do with why they're even there. Do you pick up on this when a salesperson's trying to sell you something? You do, don't you? That's the first 10% of time spent with a prospect. building trust. Now, after that, the next 10% would be about identifying needs. The salesperson asks a few generic questions, such as this one. Sally, can you tell me 2 to 3 problems that you're experiencing now and what you'd like to see happen to fix those problems? The prospect would then rattle off a few generic problems to the salesperson with simple, logical answers that are just really the surface of what's really going on. And at that point, the salesperson does what? They go into their sales pitch or presentation, talking about all the features and benefits of what their product or service can do and how great their company is. And they have the best this and they have the best that, which, by the way, every salesperson says, right? How many salespeople trying to sell you something say that they have the 5th best product in the market? Probably none. As you can see, that's 50%. Presenting is 50% of the old model. Then the last 30% of the sale is they go in for the close. And then what happens? The prospect throws out objections. Then the salesperson has to try to overcome their objections and try to close them again and again. Then at this point, the salesperson starts to chase them to try to convince them to purchase. Does that sound familiar to you? So let's look at the composition of the time spent on each activity. That was 10% building trust, which is really bad. 10% identifying needs by asking a few logical questions. 50% on the presentation or pitch. And then 30% asking for the sale and dealing with objections. So as you can see here, only about 10% of the time is actually building trust. The modern day salesperson knows that trust is king in sales. Pretty soon you're going to see what I'm talking about and you're going to know the same, because you'll see that time spent on discovery and building trust is where the sale is actually made now, in the post-trust era, not in the presentation or by trying to close at the end of the sale. Now, don't get me wrong, the old model of selling, traditional selling techniques, does teach you how to ask some questions. But 99% of salespeople don't have the right questions. They don't know when to ask the right questions at the right time in the actual conversation. They just ask what I call surface questions, which only get superficial answers from your potential customers. It's the salesperson against the customer mentality, like you're going to war every day against your prospects, trying to manipulate and win them over to the sale. This traditional model of presenting, closing, and combating objections primarily focuses on what? Logically, the focus is absolutely not on the customer in this common sales scenario. Reconsider your answer and choose again. Not even close. Try again. Yes, it puts the emphasis on you, the salesperson, and your agenda of making the sale, not the customer. Now, I have to ask you a really silly question. Who do you think the customer cares most about? Do you think they care about you and your agenda trying to make a sale? Or do you think they care more about themselves and what they're looking for? Think about it. Do you like being pushed into buying something or talking to someone whose only agenda is to get what they want? When a salesperson does this to you, what do you typically do? What happens is one of two things. First, you either get defensive, you throw out objections, and you reject what's being offered, or you do this, you withdraw from them, you go into witness protection mode, you don't return their calls, you don't return their texts or emails. Does that sound familiar? So have you ever considered that your prospects are doing the exact same thing to you because of how you were taught how to communicate and sell? I want you to reflect on that and be honest with yourself. It's your responsibility to yourself, your career, and your future income. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to dig a bit deeper into what's happening out there in the world of sales and what old techniques you need to get rid of like the plague if you want to go from where you're at now to the income you want to be at. So if you're average at sales now or below average, how do you get good at sales? If you're good at sales now, how do we get you great at sales? And if you're great at sales, how do we get you to be a master of sales? Are you with me? Now, first, here's a quick quiz. I'll see you on the other side.
Fuck. The new model of salesperson always starts out. I'm a failure.
Most of what we understand about selling is based on a